Every single year we talk about the NFL draft and which players we believe are going to be some of the best players from that draft class. But oftentimes there are certain players who are either really good or could end up being really bad. We call those boom or bust like players. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the 8 boom or bust players of the 2025 NFL draft. Subscribe if you're new. Let's hop into it. So before we get into my top 8 list, I do want to hand out a few honorable mentions. I have 3 names. I will say there's a lot more players I could throw in the honorable mentions, but these are just some names that I thought of as I was making the video. Those players are Quinn Ewers, Isaiah Bond, and Jackson Dart. For Quinn Ewers, I think he's one of those players who needs time to develop and can become something really special, but again, needs time to develop and potentially could be out of the league within the first couple years. For Jackson Dart, if he is taken in the first round, I think he is a little bit of an overdrafted player, so it will be interesting to see where he ends up going. I also think he needs time to develop. And then for Isaiah Bond, he's somebody who had a lot of issues at Texas with injuries and just inconsistencies, but we all know the special talent that he does have with his speed. So that ultimately puts him in an honorable mention spots. But with that said, at number 8, I have Jalen Milroe. Now, Jalen Milroe is kind of the epitome of a boom or bust player. If he does become what we think he can be, there is a chance that he ends up becoming a really good starter in the NFL because of his athletic profile, because of his deep ball accuracy, because of some of the glimpses we've seen in the RPO game and certain games with Alabama, like specifically the Georgia game, where he looks like he's in control of things. But then there's the opposite side of things, where we've seen the really ugly of Jalen Milroe, where he's inaccurate, he's bad at making decisions, and sometimes he can't get out of everything with just his pure athleticism. For example, you look at that Oklahoma game, which was probably his worst game maybe of his career, going up against an Oklahoma team that had, some of the worst quarterback play in the country, yet Bama lost in main part because of how bad Jalen Milroe was in that game. So for Milroe, like Quinn Ewers, like Jackson Dart, like a lot of quarterbacks in this class, I do think he needs a lot of time to develop, a lot of time to grow. And if given the time to sit behind a veteran quarterback, learn behind him, develop with a strong quarterbacks coach, then I do think Jalen Milroe has the possibility to become something somewhat special in this league. It all just comes down to, can he ultimately reach that, of course, the boom part of this title. If Milroe can, then again, I think he's a fantastic player, but I also think there's a very real chance that Jalen Milroe never fully develops and is potentially just a backup or a gadget-like guy for his entire career. We've also seen quarterbacks who have this sort of freakish athletic profile who never could really pan out as throwers, and then they ultimately end up changing positions. Not saying that's what happens with Jalen Milroe. I'm just saying there is the possibility that he has that, bust of a quarterback and then moves to another position. So again, Milroe is one of my top boom or bust players, because I think his boom is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but if he busts, he's probably out of the league or not playing quarterback anymore. Number 7, I have Mykel Williams. Now, Mykel Williams is somebody who I think if you ask each different NFL analyst their thoughts of Mykel Williams, I feel like you're going to get several different answers, but there's always going to be at least a couple common themes with it. For example, some NFL analysts are going to say, oh, I like the upside of what Mykel Williams can be, whereas for other analysts, they're going to say, I don't think he ever is going to reach that upside. So there's kind of a big divide on how you feel about Mykel Williams. I sort of stand on the side of I think Mykel Williams can be really good if he develops. So for Mykel Williams, his pros are that I think he will be an elite run stuffer, or at least a very good and capable run defender at the NFL level. He's got prototypical size, he's a really good athlete, and he also plays with a very good motor. Like, this guy's always trying to make the big plays out there. With that said, he is a little bit lackluster as a pass rusher. So as a pass rusher, he just leaves a lot to be desired. Last year for Georgia, he had an 11.1% pass rush win rate with a PFF grade of 70.7 as a pass rush grade, which is just really not that good. Again, as a run defender, he's really solid and has a very high ceiling as a true run defender, but that's kind of what makes him to be a boom or bust player. For Mykel Williams to ultimately become the guy we think he can be, he's got to improve as a pass rusher, or else he's just going to be a really okay rotational edge rusher who's probably more of a first and second down guy, but probably taken off the field for more true pass rushing reps. So for Mykel, I think if he can reach his ultimate ceiling and become the player we think he can be, we're talking about somebody who can be one of the better edge defenders in the NFL. However, if he does not reach his potential, and if he never really develops a true pass rush skill set and continues to struggle against really solid tackles, there's a possibility that he's maybe not out of the league, but maybe more of like a just pure depth option, like a third or fourth string edge rusher who gets limited playing time. But again, we're talking about a guy who's going to be taken in the first round, or at least we think, potentially even as high as top 15. So that is kind of the boom or bust element of Micah Williams, which I do think there will be a team willing to take the bet on because of his physical profile. Moving to number 6, we have the highly controversial Shedeur Sanders. Now I say controversial because a lot of people don't like the guy. I personally like Shedeur Sanders. I have no issue with him, and I think he is a good prospect. With that said, there is a lot of buzz about where Shedeur Sanders will land, and it has felt like more recently we have started to see Shedeur Sanders' stock kind of fall a little bit down to where he's maybe not a top 5 pick lock no more, and maybe more of a spot in the middle of the first round to late first round, maybe even on day 2. So if that was to happen, I think that's maybe a better spot for Shedeur Sanders, more so than like a top 5 pick. But there still is the element of boom or bust with Shedeur Sanders, as there is for basically every quarterback in this draft class. Shedeur is one of the most accurate, fundamentally sound quarterbacks in this draft class. I think the mental aspect of the game is very good for Shedeur Sanders. I think he processes the field fine. I don't think he makes bad decisions very often. And I think for the most part, he's a reliable quarterback who you feel really confident who can be your starting quarterback for years to come. This is not a guy like a Will Levis, who was taken in the second round, is kind of thought to be around the same value as Shedeur Sanders. But for Will Levis, you were really high on him because of his arm talent and physical profile, whereas for Shedeur, his arm talent isn't the greatest. His physical profile, he stands around 6'1", so he's not a massive individual, nor is he incredibly strong. For Shedeur, where he shines is yet again the mental aspect, the fundamental side of things. For Will Levis, who again, we're comparing these guys because they're kind of going to be ranked similar to one another, like top 40 prospects, which is around where Will Levis was, and we all know how that worked out for Will Levis. For Levis, again, it was all just because of the physical ability that he had. So Will Levis was a boom or bust guy. I think Shedeur Sanders is kind of in that mold because I think if he is to maximize his potential, get put into the right spot, and actually thrive in the NFL, it's likely going to be because of how sound he is fundamentally. He's going to have really good talent around him, and his accuracy decision making is going to make him a good quarterback. However, if he's put into a situation where the team around him isn't that good and he has to run for his life out there, I think that's where you will see the limitations of Shedeur Sanders really stand out. Shedeur is somebody who does hold the ball quite long. Shedeur is somebody who ran a system that liked to throw a lot of screens, liked to throw a bunch of dump off passes and easy throws for Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur also, more than likely, will not be playing with Travis Hunter anymore, so he doesn't really have that consistent go-to guy, barring the fact that he goes to a team that might have that guy. So for Shedeur, if he is to become the player we think he can be, I think Shedeur Sanders can be a really solid quarterback in the NFL, a starting quarterback at that. But if he isn't put into the right situation and doesn't really develop in certain areas of his game, I could see a scenario where Shedeur Sanders ends up becoming just a good backup quarterback, which again isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. Compare that to like Jalen Milroe, who potentially could be out of the league in the first couple years. But given the fact that we have high expectations of Shedeur Sanders and the fact that he is a possible top 5 pick, that's kind of where the bust element comes involved here. Number 5, Colston Loveland. Now, I will be completely transparent here with this one. I am not as high on Colston Loveland as a lot of other people are, and there's a few reasons for this. But I do want to talk about the pros of Colston Loveland because I think there's a lot of really good things about this guy. For starters, he is a very, very good athlete. He stands around 6'5", around 240 pounds, can move around really nicely, very solid route runner, and very good hands. With that said, he's more of a receiver than he is like an actual tight end. Now, he has shown the ability to play fundamentally sound tight end play. Like when he tries to block, like he has good technique. It's just he's just not big enough. Like he's 240 pounds. Compare that to like a 270-pound edge rusher who's jacked as all could be and can move around NFL tackles. Like they're going to expose Colston Loveland. And that's for me really where I kind of am a little bit lower on Colston Loveland. I don't think he's really a traditional tight end, so I don't think he can be a 3-down guy. I think you need to have somebody opposite of him who is more of that 3-down style guy who is a great run blocker, but can also go out there and make some plays in the receiving game. I also think for somebody who is as good of a receiving tight end as he isn't really that good after the catch. And I think as a 50-50 ball winner, which you would kind of expect for a 6'5" tight end, he really isn't that guy either. So what I see in Colston Loveland is somebody who could play in the slot, hell, can maybe even play on the outside, is just so big and athletic that I think he can be a really solid safety blanket for a quarterback. The reason why I think that he's a boom or bust player is I just don't know how many teams are realistically going to have enough patience with him to develop him as a blocker and allow him to not necessarily be a 3-down tight end. Like, I could see NFL teams trying to get this guy to put on a little bit of extra weight, put his hand in the dirt, and do some run blocking, which you don't really want to do with Colston Loveland. But again, he plays the tight end position, so I could see NFL teams trying to do that. I think for Colston Loveland, if he does get put in the right situation where he is just more used as a receiving threat in the tight end room, then I think Colston Loveland could be a good player who maybe gets close to 800, 900 yards a season, maybe even more, and becomes a really reliable safety blanket for a number of teams. However, I could also see a world where there are NFL teams that want him to play more of a 3-down role and become a bit more of like a Travis Kelce-like guy who maybe not the greatest run blocker, but is a fantastic receiving threat, but also is going to be put out there to do a lot of run blocking as well, which Loveland is just, I don't know if he's there quite yet. Again, I do think for him, I think that he has the fundamentals to be really good at it, which makes me think that he could be a really good player. I just personally don't see the top 20 talent that some people are putting him out there to be. If he's a late first round pick, I think that's exactly where he should probably go. Moving to number 4, we have Josh Simmons. Now, I like Josh Simmons as a prospect. It was really a bummer that he went down with an injury because I think prior to the injury, there was maybe a case to be made that Josh Simmons was maybe the second or first best tackle in this class, like up in there with Membu now, Kelvin Banks before, and even like Will Campbell. But after the injury, it's become a little bit more concerning. One of the bigger aspects of Josh Simmons' game is his athletic profile. For somebody who is as big and strong and physical as Josh Simmons, having that athletic profile has got him out of a number of different situations. But with this concerning injury that he has, which by the way is a torn ACL, I am a little bit concerned about how his long-term future could be impacted by this. Again, this is somebody who does rely on his movement skills, his ability to be more athletic than the guy in front of him, to, get in front of them or push them down the field. He's an incredibly smart player, and I do think that if he is able to come back from this ACL and be the same guy that he was prior to him, which we have seen multiple times with dudes who tear their ACL, hell, even multiple times, and still end up playing 10 plus years after their ACL injuries, I could see that world also happening for Josh Simmons. But in a hypothetical scenario where this torn ACL maybe limits him as a mover, limits him as his athletic profile, limits him athletically, then I could see a world where Josh Simmons potentially struggles for a couple years, and it might take him a bit more time to actually become the guy that we all thought he could be coming out of Ohio State prior to the injury. Again, I think this guy has all the talent in the world. He's big, he's strong. His lower half leaves a little bit to be desired, but again, I think that kind of adds to it because of his athletic profile and the way that he's able to move. But he is able to get his hands on you. He's extremely competitive. His footwork is solid. It really stays on balance and blocking. So I think Josh Simmons has everything that you want. But man, this ACL injury is extremely concerning. And if the ACL is fine and if he can come back from it 100%, then he's really not going to be that much of a bust player. But again, we're talking about a torn ACL with a guy whose game is kind of based on his movements. So if he is able to come back from this injury and be himself, I think we're talking about Josh Simmons being one of the better offensive linemen in this class. However, if the ACL maybe takes time to heal and takes time for him to get back to being who he usually is, then I could see a world where Josh Simmons maybe takes a few years to become the guy that maybe he could end up being, and we'll see if an NFL team is willing to be patient with him. All right, let's move on to number 3. I have Jalen Walker. I guess kind of another guy who's sort of the epitome of boom or bust. Now, Jalen Walker, for full transparency, is not as high on my big board as he is on a lot of other people's big board. I've seen Jalen Walker be as highly taken as 8 or even higher than that by several analysts. Like, I've seen him go as high as top 5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. For me, I think Jalen Walker is somebody who is a bit of a project player. I think he can learn on the job. Like, he isn't somebody who needs to sit behind someone for 3 years and then, 3 years down the line becomes an actual player for the team. Like, no, I think he needs to learn on the job. But we're talking about somebody who will likely be played more as a true edge rusher a couple years down the line, although he's listed as more of a linebacker at Georgia. Now, for Georgia, he kind of played both sides, where he was an off-ball linebacker who played, in the middle, and then sometimes would go in and make some blitzes there, and sometimes they'd even put him outside as more of a true edge rusher, which is where I think a lot of NFL teams see him ultimately playing at the NFL level. He's got good size. He's a very good athlete. I think the thing for him is that if you want him to be a true edge rusher, right now he leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of actual skill set. Right now he's kind of just a moldable piece of clay who you can maybe turn into something really special because of how good he is both athletically and physically on the field. But again, he's somebody who's very raw at the position. So if you want to put him there, I think it might take a little bit of some time for him to develop there. But if you want to stick him as a true linebacker, I think his skill set is perfectly fine there as well. I think in coverage, he can be a little lackluster at times, which is fine for most linebackers because I don't think many NFL teams expect linebackers to be incredible in coverage unless you're like Fred freaking Warner. He also can sometimes shoot gaps a little bit too often and sometimes miss some tackles because of his aggressiveness. However, I think he's a really smart player who can play linebacker, especially if he's around a great veteran who can kind of help him hone in his game as a off-ball linebacker. Then I could easily see him playing that at the NFL level. Again, I just think NFL teams are likely going to try to stick him out as like an edge rusher, but I think he's maybe better suited more in like a Frankie Louvu role where, yes, he's going to blitz the quarterback a crap ton, but he's also going to play linebacker a lot as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Jalen Walker can become because I think at his best, when he becomes the guy we think he can be, we're talking about somebody who's could end up being the ultimate weapon for a defense because he can play off-ball linebacker while also being a dominant edge rusher, kind of like maybe not Micah Parsons, but again, like Frankie Louvu. Or it could end up in a situation where he never quite develops at either position because he's splitting time at both sides, and he ends up being just nothing more than like an okay player at both positions. So for Jalen, he's kind of the epitome of boom or bust, especially for somebody who is taken as highly as what a lot of people think he might end up being taken at. But moving on to number 2, I have Shamar Stewart. This is another guy who kind of is the epitome of boom or bust. If he booms, we're talking about somebody who could be fantastic at the NFL level. But if he doesn't turn out to be the guy we think he can be, I think you're looking at somebody who's just a really good athlete who's more of just a backup option. Shamar Stewart has the entire physical and athletic profile that you want of an NFL edge rusher. I mean, there's a reason why people are so high on Shamar Stewart. The reason why he is that boomer bust player is productivity has never been there for Shamar, which is something that is his major knock as to why a lot of people don't think he should be a top 15 pick. If Shamar Stewart had James Pierce Jr. like stats, we're talking about Shamar Stewart likely being a top 5 pick because again, the profile is there. It just comes down to the fact that on the field play sometimes might leave a little bit to be desired, especially when it comes to actually putting real statistics on the stat chart. I think Shamar is similar to Jalen Walker in the sense that I think he is a developmental guy who's going to learn on the job and kind of is a moldable piece of clay. I kind of look at him similar to how I view Trayvon Walker, even though I think Trayvon was a better prospect at this time, where I see the overall profile of the athlete, of the player, and I see the size element that I'm like and falling in love with. But I see somebody who needs time to, grow their pass rush tree out, learn how to bend around the corner slightly better, especially in actual game situations, and ultimately just finish the job, make the tackle on the play. That's kind of what I saw from Trayvon Walker, even though I think Walker was better at a lot of those things coming out of college. Compare that to Shamar Stewart, but I see a very similar style. Now, Trayvon Walker was taken first overall, and a lot of people saw that as a bit of a reach. I personally did as well, and he's ended up becoming a really good player in the NFL. And I think Shamar Stewart is somebody who's going to have a pretty similar timeline to Trayvon Walker, where that first year he's likely just going to be nothing more than an opposite starter of somebody else who maybe is going to be more of their true pass rusher. And then as time goes on, he's going to get better and better and better. And you look at the stat sheet, and in year 1, he had 5 sacks. Year 2, he had 6 sacks. And year 3, he booms and gets 8-10 sacks, right? So for Shamar Stewart, if he can follow a similar trajectory to a guy like Trayvon Walker, then I think Shamar Stewart would easily be worth the first round pick. However, there's also the possibility, just like with Trayvon Walker, where maybe the athletic profile and the physical profile is maybe not as good as the actual player on the field. Like the person you see in front of you is a Greek god, but maybe he isn't that guy on the football field, which is very real for Shamar Stewart, where he might just end up being a really big physical athletic player who just can never get the fundamentals down and ends up becoming a first round bust. So for Shamar, I think he can be a good player. It all just comes down to, with basically every player, maximizing what you're good at and becoming the guy we think you can ultimately be. And if he is able to do so, again, I think he could be a great player. But number 1 is Cam Ward. I mean, this guy's going to be the number 1 overall pick. and is still somewhat a little bit of a quote-unquote project guy. Now, he's somebody who will be a day one starter, especially if he is taken by Tennessee, but I still think that he is somebody that has a lot of kinks to work in his game. Now, the pros of Cam Ward, the dude is a baller. He's a playmaker. This dude loves to make plays. He loves to throw the ball deep. He loves to be creative out there. And a lot of times, he's really good at doing it. Like, this guy was one of the best quarterbacks in college football for a reason, and I think at the NFL level, you see what he can end up becoming. Again, if you look at, I hate to make the comparison with Josh Allen, but I'm going to kind of make the comparison here where Josh Allen came out of Wyoming, big, physical, athletic, strong arm, but just needed to work out some kinks into his game, like the turnover issues, maybe some inaccuracy problems, so on and so forth. And for a lot of us, including myself, I kind of saw that and said, yeah, this guy's probably going to be a bust, because how many other times have we seen guys who are big, physical, strong, athletic, have really good arms, but never had the mental aspect of the game down? And after the first year of Josh Allen, I think a lot of us felt pretty vindicated that we were right. Like, yeah, this guy's going to be a bust. And then obviously every year, Josh Allen just got better and better and better and better until obviously he won MVP this year. For Cam Ward, I don't think he's a similar player to Josh Allen. I just make the comparison because I think as prospects, we view them kind of similar to one another, where Cam Ward, good arm, strong arm, physical, good athlete, can move around quite well, is a baller, can make some big plays out of nothing, but sometimes can make some dumb plays. He can just be inconsistent with his fundamentals, his mechanics, kind of like what Josh Allen looked like at times. But again, you want to see that progression in Cam Ward's career where year one, he's okay and maybe gets the Titans going in the right direction, if we assume he goes to the Titans at that. But really, you want to see every single year him get better and better and better and better and become the guy we think he can ultimately be. However, there is an alternate world out there where Cam Ward enters the league, has a bad rookie year, and never truly develops and ends up kind of just becoming one of those guys who had all the potential in the world, but never could quite get the NFL game truly down. The good news for the Titans is that they do have a quality backup now in Will Levis, who I know hasn't panned out, but is still young and still is developing. So maybe if Cam Ward doesn't work out, maybe Will Levis has the ultimate redemption. We'll have to wait and see on that one. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. But again, for Cam Ward, man, like, I think as a prospect, we're talking about somebody who is as legit as they come. Physical profile is there, athletic profile is solid. Even the mental aspect of the game, I think, isn't terribly bad. It just comes down to, can he get the NFL game down and just, make smarter decisions and not necessarily always have that gunslinging mentality. But you guys let me know in the comment section below your favorite boom or bust player. Let me know. I love you guys. Peace.